Welcome to part 5 of how to build a website for a small business.
Today we're going to really look at some admin stuff in the background, so it probably won't take us as long to get through the kind of main things that you need to consider. And it really continues on from, you've structured your site, you've created some great content, you've got it, your navigation is good, you've got everything working on your site, you've optimized it all. But sort of what's next? How do you actually get people to come to the website so that they actually see all that hard work that you've put into in the background? So today we're going to look at some admin stuff and a little bit about how you get people to actually find your website, and some things that you can do to make it easier for people to get to you once you've put in all the hard work to actually create the site. You do need to keep your website up to date. It can become quite vulnerable if you have lots of out-of-date plugins, themes, even the WordPress version itself. Now, if you're on a free site, WordPress do all this for you because they keep it up to date. If you are you're self-hosted, then it's up to you to make sure that your site is updated. Everything that you have on there will issue regular updates, whether that's to fix bugs that people have found, whether the previous update created a new bug that they didn't know about, to fix security issues, vulnerabilities that they've found within the code, and to just make general improvements to the plugin, to the theme, to keep things up to date. If you are not updating, then your site is at risk. Anything that hasn't had a security patch applied to it does obviously leave you with a vulnerability on your site. And out-of-date plugins or old plugins that are no longer being updated by the developer, those are very common ways that people can use to get into your site. And as soon as a vulnerability is identified and is kind of out there in the wild, people will take advantage of it. So if you're not keeping on top of your updates, then you are at risk until they're updated. We update from our dashboard. So it's when you're in your plugins area, you can update all your plugins directly from the plugins area, which you can see down here. But you can also see all the updates that are required on your site from the updates area, which will include themes and the version of WordPress that you're running. When you need updates, in the top bar here, you'll get a little update symbol will add into the top bar, so you can see at a glance when you first go in if there are any updates. Plugins is obvious because there'll be a red number in a circle next to the word plugins when you need a plugin updated. But because your themes are hidden under the appearance menu and your WordPress update is hidden under your dashboard menu, you don't see them immediately. The only way you'll know that without checking is if you've got the little update symbol just here, and it will tell you that you need it. It's a little like circle, arrow circle, and it will tell you that you need to do updates. You should do them as soon as you notice them, update them. And we did talk yesterday about things like inactive plugins and getting rid of them. If you're not using something, delete it. Even if you've got a plugin that's inactive at the moment because you don't need it, but you want to keep it, make sure it's updated so that you're keeping your site as safe as possible. You should check every time you log in. If you're not logging in very often to do other things, if your site is fairly static, I would recommend at least once a week going and checking, just from an admin perspective, go in and have a quick glance and make sure that nothing needs updated. It's just good practice. It's a good habit to get into. There are also various plugins that you can use to help you keep your site safe. And to keep it running smoothly. So Jetpack is one which I've mentioned before. It's some people love it, some people hate it. You can do all the functionality that Jetpack does using other plugins. So Jetpack, because it's quite a big plugin, some people feel it's quite heavy on your site. It can slow things up a little bit. I've never really noticed a massive issue with it on smaller sites because your sites are quite light anyway. And it does have a lot of good features because it's bringing that, as I said, the power of WordPress.com into your self-hosted WordPress site. So all the nice little things that they have running in the background for you on the free site, you can take advantage of them on your self-hosted site. It does things like lazy loading for images. You can access the spam monitoring in there. It monitors your for downtime, so it warns you if your site is down for any reason, so that you can check and make sure that there isn't an issue. So there's some good stuff in there in Jetpack, and it's all a sort of one-stop shop. If you already have a load of images on your site that weren't optimized before you uploaded them, you have two choices. One, you can re-upload every image there and replace big images with small ones. Or you can use a plugin called Smush, which smushes. It basically makes your images smaller. It's not as good as optimizing them in the first place, but it can certainly reduce the size of your images. And you can get it to do it retrospectively, so you can smush all your previous images, and then going forward it will smush the images that you have uploaded. It will compress them. Once you get into the habit of optimizing your images, you don't actually need it anymore. If you've compressed all the ones that were there, you can actually get rid of it, because if you're then uploading optimized images, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference because it doesn't have much compression left to do on them. Another thing that I've mentioned is backups. There are a few different options for this. There are free ones and there are paid ones. Updraft is one of the ones that has a free version, and it will send a backup to a number of different places. For example, you can set it to backup to Google Drive, to the Amazon Drive, to various different places, to email. You can download a backup out of it. And if then you do have an issue, for example, sometimes when you update a plugin, your site might not like that update because there's an issue with the update, and you may need to roll your site back. So your Updraft or other, you can use that to restore your site. VaultPress is another one. It's a paid one, and it's another very good backup plugin. There are others, but just mentioning a couple to not overwhelm. Again, we've talked about security scanning, so scanning for malware and getting a firewall in there. Your host will do that for you to a certain extent, depending on what comes with their hosting plans. But a bit like having your own offsite backup, it's not a bad idea to have your own malware scanning as well, just so that you've got that kind of secondary layer of protection on your site. WordFence is one of the top ones. They have a free version. They do also have a pro version, but they have a pretty good free version. Securi is another of the big ones. It's a paid product, and it really depends on how large your site is, how sensitive the data is on the site, how often you're updating. There's lots of things to consider when you're looking at backup and malware scanning options as to how extensive those need to be. For the most part, a free version on small sites is going to do what you need it to do. But that's a very kind of personal decision based on your site and how much is there. Another thing to think about is optimizing your database and caching, which are both things that help speed up your site. Your database can get very heavy with things that you don't need anymore. So for example, when you make any revision to a post, it saves all the previous revisions in your database. And every so often it's a good idea to clear all of those out because you don't need them anymore. So WP Optimize is one plugin that does that, where you can set that to optimize your and clean up your database. It'll clean up, like it will empty out trash comments and spam comments. So there's a number of things that it does, and it just keeps things clean and tidy, and you don't have any extra data sitting there that you don't need. You can also look at caching, which means that your pages are cached for people that have been there before. It's a loading speed thing. It does various other things, but simply it's another way of speeding up the loading of your site, particularly for returning visitors. It's not an exhaustive list, but those are some of the main kind of admin things which aren't, which are, not the design elements of your site, but just the background, back end stuff that you need to be thinking about and making sure that you as the website owner are keeping up to date with, and making sure that your site is secure and safe and running smoothly and is giving a good user experience in terms of speed. Okay, Google. How do we actually get Google to find your site? And how do we know if people are? So in terms of establishing that people are finding your site, there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to connect your site to Google Analytics, which is a pretty simple process. You need to create a Google Analytics account, which you'll use, like everything, a Google account to do. You add the property, which is your website, to that account, and then you are able to see who's visiting your site, what pages they're going to, where they're coming from. Are they coming from direct organic search, i.e. someone's typing in the URL into Google, or are they coming from Facebook or Pinterest or somewhere else where your link is, a newsletter, whatever. You can track all of that information with Google Analytics. There's a thing called Google Search Console, which gives you more information in terms of your traffic and really where it's coming from in terms of search terms, how people are finding you, what are they typing in that is directing people to your site. So that's the other thing. And again, it's pretty easy to set up. You just need your Google account and you add the property. And then you can connect your Google Analytics and Google Search Console accounts together so that you can see all of that information easily. In order to make the final connection, once you have those accounts, you do need to either add some code into the header of your site with the tag, your Google Analytics tag in it, or you can use a plugin to do that. There are a number of different Google Analytics plugins which will make the connection for you without you needing to add any code in it anywhere. Monster Insights is one. I think we have exact metrics on the SDM site. And that means that, one, Google knows that your site is your site and it connects the dots between the two things. And if you are using a plugin, it also means that the high level information you can actually see through your dashboard, which means you don't need to go into Google Analytics itself all the time if you don't want to. You can get a fair amount of information through your WordPress dashboard. The reporting mechanism is there via the plugin. For more detailed analysis, you still need to go into Google Analytics, but it will give you a good overview of where you are and where people are coming from, where they're being referred from. You do get basic stat information if you install Jetpack, which at a high level gives you as much as you need on a kind of daily basis. It's a good quick fix in terms of seeing how many page views you had, how many users have been there, and what pages they're visiting and where they've come from. But if you want to do any kind of detailed audience analysis, then you really need Google Analytics to be up and running as well. And obviously you need to make, at the very least, you need to make the connection between the two so that Google is tracking your site and crawls your site. The next thing that we then look at, because this all links together, is search engine optimization. So you'll hear the term SEO, and that is search engine optimization. And here a little quote from Moz, who are one of the big kind of analyzers of sites and rankers of sites. SEO is the practice of increasing the quantity and quality of traffic to your website through organic search engine results. And this is what you really want. You don't want everybody to have to know you exist before they find you. You want to rank in Google for certain search terms so that they find you independently. So that if someone searches for jewelry designer Melrose, then they find you rather than somebody else. There's a few things that you need to do. So you need to make sure that your site has been crawled and indexed by Google. And by setting up Google Analytics and installing a plugin, which I'm about to mention, called Yoast, that creates your sitemap and make sure that your sitemap is in your search console, that's how you ensure that Google is crawling and indexing your site efficiently and is finding all your pages. Obviously, you need compelling content, and although a lot of the SEO stuff happens in the background in terms of keywords and connections to Google and stuff, content is still massively important, and the quality of your content is analyzed in the way that length of posts, the number of times people have visited that content, the length of time that they stay on that content, all of those things are picked up by your analytics. So Google knows that, and it helps with your ranking in Google. So content is still absolutely right up at the top of the list in terms of importance. Obviously, then you need to make sure that your keywords are optimized for that content. So making sure that you have key phrases, keywords that are dotted through the content, as in the headings, as in the content, in the meta descriptions, all that level of detail to make sure that you're optimizing for those keywords so that you begin to rank for those search terms. Site speed, which we've just mentioned, is important in terms of the Google ranking. Content being share-worthy is also helpful, because if people like it enough to share it, then more people are going to see it, which obviously bumps up your standings in terms of the ranking. And that the titles are optimized. So you can actually have two different titles on your content. You can have the title that you see on the website, but you can also have an SEO title that is the one that is displayed by Google. Most of the time they're going to be the same if you're optimizing your titles, but it is possible that you might want a slightly different title for your SEO title than the one that you want on your website, and you can do that if we install a plugin called Yoast. And last on this list is that, and something I should have mentioned when we were talking about pages and designing content, is making sure that your site's optimized for different screen sizes, particularly for mobile. One of the ranking factors is responsiveness. And you'll find that, I mean, I know that one of my sites, for example, has already switched over to mobile first ranking, because most people visit that site from their mobile, from their cell phone. So it's extremely important that the theme that you choose is well optimized as a theme and is responsive to different screen sizes. But then also when you're designing the content, that it is laid out and spaced sufficiently so that when you view it on mobile, things don't overlap, that you can still click all the buttons. And if you use a page builder, it's very easy to do that, because you can actually edit it differently for different views. So margins particularly are something that it might look great on a desktop, but when it transfers to a cell phone screen, things overlap, or the setting out of it doesn't look quite right. And it's good to be able to tweak those settings for the cell phone view to make sure that you don't get penalized by Google. An error that I often see in Search Console and coming from Google is that content isn't clickable. The user area isn't sufficient. So what that means is that the way that the margins have been set out for the desktop view mean that everything's kind of scrunched together on mobile and you can't access the full screen properly. So that's another thing that you need to check, because Google will look for that and sites will be penalized if they're not optimized for different screen sizes. I mentioned keywords. It's one that you can do quite easily yourself, but it does require a bit of research into it. You need to use keywords in your titles, in your content, and in the meta descriptions. And the meta description is the bit that appears in a Google search result. If you don't set a meta description, it will just take the first few lines of the content as your meta description. So it's a good idea to write specific meta descriptions for your pages and for your post content. Do your research. There's no point in putting in very, very broad search terms that everybody in the world uses. You want to try to make sure that your keywords and key phrases are specific to the content that you're producing, so that people find you rather than the 3 million other websites that use the same keyword. You can use Google to see what people are searching for. So if you have a particular piece of content and you're trying to decide what to call it, what you want the title to be, if you start searching for that piece of content, you can see Google will start to predict what you're looking for, and you can use those suggestions to help tailor your phrasing. You can also use the people also searched for thing, which so you'll see other ways that people have found the same type of content, can give you some clues as to how to phrase your key phrases. Pinterest is actually very good for this because the way that it guesses what kind of content you're looking for is very useful from a keyword perspective, because if you're searching for, I can never think of examples when I should have a list of examples written down for these things. So if you're searching for travel, then it will automatically start to guess, okay, do you want travel hacks? Do you want packing tips? Do you want destination ideas? So you can see from the guesses that it makes, the kinds of things that people are likely to be searching for under the heading travel, which again helps you to design good titles and key phrases for your content. There are also tools that you can use. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, that you can actually use to do your keyword research for you, that will suggest keywords for you, things like Word Tracker, Moz, or even there's a tool within the Google Ads product as well, that you can use to do that. If we look quickly, I've mentioned Yoast a couple of times. Yoast is an SEO plugin, and it's an extremely popular plugin. Everybody uses it because it helps guide you to making good decisions in terms of SEO. It doesn't do the SEO for you, but it will score your attempts at SEO. It won't score your keyword choice, but it will make sure that your keyword appears in the right places in your content. So once you've chosen your keyword or key phrase for that particular piece of content, it will make sure that you've included it in your headings, in your SEO title, in your URL, enough times in your content without overdoing it. You'll get penalized if you mention it 3 million times in the content. That your images are tagged in the right way. It will pick up quite a lot of stuff to make sure that you've really optimized for that keyword as much as possible without overdoing it. It also does a readability score, which you can take with a pinch of salt. Some of it's quite useful. Some of it's purely looking at its list of rules. And some of them are not always relevant depending on the type of content that you're writing. But it can be quite useful to have a quick look at it and see what they're suggesting. It will suggest things like your paragraphs are too long, your sentences are too long, you're using passive voice, you're starting the sentences with the same word too many times. Those are the kinds of things that it picks up. So it does encourage you to break your content up to make sure that your paragraphs are short and snappy, which all helps with your kind of white space thing and making it more readable from a user perspective. On top of that, at the back end, it also does things like create your sitemap for Google, which is very useful because it indexes and creates the sitemap that you then use to connect your Google accounts to, and to get Google to crawl and use that to establish the structure of your site and what's there, and find the best way through it. So it does have more benefits than just the keyword. So it's a very good plugin to have and to use. You won't always get green lights on things, but you don't always need to. Sometimes it's just not possible to. But it at least gives you something to aim towards. You just need to make sure that they're not red. If they're amber, you're good. Ideally green, but you're not always going to get green because it really depends on the piece of content that you're publishing. Very quickly, online stores. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because online stores in themselves it's a big thing to set up a store, and there's quite a lot that you need to do to get a store set up. But you can add store functionality to a WordPress site by using plugins. WooCommerce is probably the most well-known, but there are several others. And the best for you will depend on what you're selling, whether it's products, services, or events, or a mix of them all. WooCommerce is pretty flexible. You can get it to do just about anything. There are add-ons to it if there's something specific that you want to do. So there are some free extensions, but there are also some paid extensions. One of them, for example, is subscriptions and memberships is not part of the core WooCommerce plugin. It's an add-on. But whichever one you choose, a plugin is a good way to do it because it sets it all up for you in the background, and then you just add your products or services. And although WooCommerce is very much, unless you add things like subscriptions and memberships as a separate add-on, is kind of geared towards products, but you can make those products a service or a virtual product. It's pretty flexible. It's just a case of creating those products and defining what they are. Just a very quick note, for some people who really are just a shop, there are options other than WordPress for actually creating a site that is just a shop. So, I mean, Etsy, for example, and Shopify is another one. If that's all that you're doing. But from a business perspective, having a website presence that allows you to have more than just your products can create a better user experience. It really depends what the product is, but if you're more than just a product, then having a website with a store added to it is definitely a good way to go. And just a note, other platforms do have stores. So if someone was setting up a Wix site or a Squarespace site, they have their own kind of like plugins, but not. It's just the way that they add functionality to their sites is in a similar way that WordPress does. But obviously you're limited to their versions of it if you're using those sites, because you can't add somebody else's product into those sites. You can only add their own versions of that functionality into the sites.